Coming up on Loyola News Chicago, how the Milwaukee community is recovering after a mass shooting. And Loyola students are helping their peers get ahead for the political season.
This Northside Chicago newsroom may look like a lot of newsrooms around the city, but there's one big difference. This one is staffed by high schoolers. We'll have their story and more on tonight's episode of Loyola News Chicago.
From the Convergence Studio in the School of Communication, this is Loyola News Chicago.
Welcome to Loyola News Chicago. I'm Tim Edmonds. Milwaukee is the latest scene of a mass shooting in the United States. 6 people were killed Wednesday afternoon at the Molson Coors Brewing Company after a recently terminated employee opened fire on 5 coworkers before turning the gun on himself. The gunman was a 51-year-old man who returned to the plant with a pair of handguns shortly after being fired. The identities of the victims have yet to be released. In a press conference Wednesday night, Milwaukee's mayor called the event an unspeakable tragedy for the city. It may be an hour and a half from Chicago, but due to the shooting, home never seemed so close for Loyola students from Milwaukee. We spoke to one Loyola sophomore who lives just 20 minutes from the Molson Coors Brewery. Andrew Schweinert is a second-year soccer player at Loyola. He was at practice when the shooting happened and heard about it when his sister texted the family group chat. He says it's scary enough constantly reading about mass shootings in the news, but nothing compares to having it happen in your own backyard. He told Loyola News, quote, "It's a lot closer than I ever thought it would be." To Andrew, this shooting won't necessarily change his views on gun regulation, but he still believes military-grade weapons should have thorough background checks. Summer Ahmad also spoke today with a Loyola professor from Milwaukee.
That's right, Tim. Professor Joe Geisler has lived in Milwaukee for 25 years. Milwaukee is a city of about 600,000 people, and Professor Geisler says something like this really brings the community together.
When people heard about it, this was like your neighbors, whether or not you for sure had a family member who was one of the 1,000 employees inside that building, or whether it was just because you feel like it's a part of your life. Years at one of the stations there, most of them as the news director.
I spoke to Professor Geisler this afternoon via Zoom. She said Milwaukee has had mass shootings before, but this one hits especially hard because it's one of the city's best-known employers.
And in the case of Milwaukee, when it is something that is such a known area to so many people, this is a private tragedy for all the people who have been harmed, but it's public mourning and public grief for a community that feels like this is its neighborhood.
And Tim, Professor Geisler also said an editor at the Milwaukee newspaper commented about the outpouring of grief he saw via social media.
Thanks very much for your insight, Summer. An Associated Press study found that college students across the U.S. are seeking mental health treatment more and more frequently. The study, which looked at 39 public colleges, found that the number of students looking for treatment nearly doubled in the last 5 years. Last year, nearly 1 in 10 students asked for help. But the study also shows that the number of mental health professionals across national campuses isn't growing at the same pace. On many universities, this can lead to wait times up to several weeks long. Here at Loyola, steps are being taken to help meet the rising demand. Last year, the school saw nearly 1,800 students seek mental health care or counseling at the Lakeshore and Water Tower campuses. That's an increase from the previous 2 academic years. While not all the counselors are located at the Wellness Center, Loyola currently employs 19 mental health professionals across the 2 campuses, including 3 new positions that were created within the past year. That's about 1 professional for every 900 students. The Wellness Center said it's proud to be ahead of the common national standards, which call for 1 professional for every 1,500 students. And the university's director of counseling told Loyola News that overcoming a rising demand in mental health services means turning to more creative solutions.
We're always looking at what our web offerings are and what digital applications like apps for meditation that students might use and be able to have on their own devices. So we're trying to reach students in as many sort of ways as we can.
And while the wait time for students wanting help changes depending on the time of year, Dr. DeBayer said there is currently no wait list at Loyola. Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein is still recovering in a hospital in New York City, 3 days after he was found guilty of third-degree rape and sexual assault. Weinstein will be moved from the hospital to Rikers Island Prison until his sentencing on March 11th. Weinstein faces up to 29 years behind bars and is currently 67 years old. Here in Illinois, a new law getting rid of the statute of limitations for criminal sexual assault went into effect January 1st. That means a case with sufficient evidence can be brought to trial at any time, no matter how long ago the crime occurred. But while activists are counting this as a step in the right direction, there's still work to be done. Resilience is a Chicago-based nonprofit that supports survivors of sexual violence. Director of Advocacy Services, Maria Balata, says when the law passed, it was a long time coming. But she also warns that there are still some catches. First, the law is not retroactive, so if it has already been 10 years, the previous length of expiration, those cases cannot be brought to trial. Also, in the event of a crime, the victim must notify law enforcement within 3 years. Finally, a trial can still be turned down.
That decision still lives with the state, and it often is based on the evidence being there to charge it. But when there is, if we're outside 10, 5, whatever time frame might be, now it is an option for the state to seek that. And I think that that's important. It's an important measure.
Despite the relatively limited number of cases, this law is estimated to impact. Balata sees it as an evidence that Illinois is taking steps to stand with sexual assault victims, and survivors she's spoken to have been celebratory about it. When it comes to the future, Balata says activists need to continue to advocate for victims in new and creative ways, and work to prevent criminal sexual assault from happening in the first place. Loyola's student government wants the university to divest from fossil fuels. The Loyola Phoenix reports that about 2% of the university's $690 million endowment was invested in the fossil fuel industry back in 2016. A student center says students have been working for 10 years to make this happen. A previous survey showed that 80% of the students support divesting from fossil fuels. This week, the student government voted 20-0 to encourage student divestment. Student Government Chief Sustainability Officer Isabelle Abbott studies environmental policy and believes divestment would take pressure off of students in the Institute of Environmental Sustainability, or IES.
So at Loyola, right, we have IES, we have, this core group of people who really care about it, but then the rest of the university just kind of puts that responsibility on IES to make climate and environmental change happen.
SGLC will meet with Board of Trustees on March 12th, hoping to convince the board to divest from fossil fuels. Loyola will become just the third Jesuit university to do that. The race for the Democratic nomination continues this Saturday as South Carolina holds its Democratic primaries. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has solidified himself as the Democratic frontrunner with 46 delegates after a dominant win in the Nevada caucuses, while also boasting favorable polling in several future states and nationally. Next week, over 1/3 of all available delegates will be up for grabs as 13 states head to vote in what is commonly known as Super Tuesday. The Illinois primary is weeks away, and time is ticking away for students to register to vote. Loyola Votes is tabling in the Damon Student Center this week to encourage students to register. It can be difficult for students to find the time, especially if they live out of state. Since 2016, they've been working to get more students registered, whether it be requesting an absentee ballot or voting in Illinois. The volunteers have tabled twice this week before spring break, so they'll be able to vote. Traditionally, Loyola students have been the least likely to vote, and that may be changing.
Young people are really engaged politically. I just think that one of the best ways that we can do that is really easy. We just register to vote and go to polls, make change.
You can learn more about Loyola Votes by visiting luc.edu/vote for other events they will have. 2 years ago, Loyola started a local news source in a partnership with Senn High School, but this neighborhood newsroom is staffed by paid high schoolers. Shelby Kluver is in Rogers Park to find out why.
Sounds of typing,
Let's get rid of that. So just
video shooting,
voice to man.
The Ravens Theater is celebrating neighborhood night.
and story pitching fill the newsroom of the Rogers Edge Reporter. Nestled in between a comic book store and a gift shop, it's an online, local publication dedicated to news happening in Rogers Park and Edgewater, two of Chicago's northern neighborhoods. High school students fill the bureau 4 afternoons a week, but they're not here on a class visit or to work as interns. They're paid staff members and the journalists powering Rogers Edge Reporter. Elver Muchkanovic is a senior at Senn High School and has worked in the newsroom for nearly 2 full years. He's found a passion for storytelling and video editing, especially when it comes to stories that might be ignored by other news outlets.
But our sort of area in the Rogers Park and Edgewater area has so much news that really goes under the, rug pretty much.
The students work with mentors from Loyola University, as well as the bureau chief and veteran journalist John Carpenter. To him, Rogers Edge fills a need for neighborhood news and provides the young reporters with real-world experience.
There are some of our high school students who definitely have an interest in being journalists, but there are others who are interested in doing journalism, and some are, frankly, also just interested in having an after-school job because they get paid. But the skills that they learn, I think, are very transferable to whatever they do.
As the publication continues to grow, Rogers Edge hopes to dive deeper into video creation and expand the number of high schools involved. And for the students, telling the news goes beyond collecting a paycheck.
True journalism in its pure essence is a beauty. It's a work of art.
After all, it's an endeavor benefiting not only the students working, but also the community they serve. Shelby Kluver, Loyola News, Chicago.
All the content the students produce can be found online at rogersedgereporter.com.
Coming up after the break, we take a look at how having spring break in the winter is affecting Loyola students. Also, men's basketball finishes the season undefeated at home. I'm Matt Mason from Loyola News Chicago, and we'll be right back.
Wow, what a disaster. Hey there, so you want a little liquid courage, but you don't want to end up like this guy. We'll have a few tips for you to help you keep it classy. First, keep track of the number of drinks you have. Second, don't drink super fast. Relax, bro. Third, drink plenty of water. If you follow these simple tips, you're bound to be a hit at the next party. Good luck out there, sport, and remember, be smart.
Good googly moogly, Elizabeth. How are you? I don't know, I keep calling you Elizabeth. I know your name's Amanda.
Loyola men's basketball wraps up the regular season this weekend, but played in its final home game Tuesday night against Drake. In the final seconds, Drake pointer and junior Keith Clemens made 2 free throws to seal a 64-60 win. Loyola junior Cameron Krutlig led the Ramblers with a team-high 17 points. The team's record now sits at 20-10 on the season and 12-5 in Missouri Valley Conference play. The Ramblers will play in their regular season finale at Bradley on Saturday. With a win and a Northern Iowa loss, Loyola will clinch at least a share of its 3rd straight MVC regular season crown. Loyola's final home game also marks the last time at Gentile Arena for Ramblers guard Brunner Skokna, the lone senior on the team's roster. Before the game, Loyola Skokna was honored at midcourt. Despite not seeing a drop in minutes this season and battling an illness Tuesday, Skokna made his first start of the season. He scored 2 points in 4 minutes. As a sophomore, the Croatian guard was a key bench player in the team's 2018 Final Four run. He played in all 38 games that season, shooting 35% from deep and averaging just over 3 points a game. Loyola men's basketball is ending the season with another year of high attendance at Gentile Arena. This season, the Ramblers averaged over 3,600 fans per game and recorded a run of 4 consecutive sellouts from January 22nd to February 15th. Loyola ends their season with a perfect 9-0 record in home conference games and their season concludes on Saturday when they travel to Peoria to take on the Bradley Braves. A home basketball game at Loyola is guaranteed to have at least 3 things: a pep band performance, yellow and maroon scarves, and one passionate Loyola student in the front of the student section. Matt Mason has more on why Charles Wang goes to every Loyola men's basketball game.
Ever since the Loyola men's basketball team went to the 2018 Final Four, the number of students attending games has risen. But there's one familiar face players have counted on to be there at every home game. Whether he's leading fan chants, heckling the refs, or hyping up the team, Charles Huang isn't shy about his love for the Ramblers. To him, fan support is the key to a successful team. Some might call him a superfan.
You know, it's 5-on-5 out here, but like we have a 6th man out here, and you know, they are right on top of the action. You know?
The senior statistics major has been to nearly every Loyola home game since January 2017, and he doesn't limit himself to one team. Charles makes a point to come out to both men's and women's basketball and volleyball games.
It's just fun to be out here, you know, just come out and support, you know, the other teams other than men's basketball. They work their butts off just like all the other student athletes here, and you know, it's just a really unique experience.
He can still remember the very first game he went to, back in January 2017, when Loyola played Evansville in what he calls a slugfest. With 30 seconds left in the game, head coach Porter Moser looked at the student section and raised his arms.
We were loud for the rest of the game, and we were able to pull out the win. That was a moment when I knew something special was happening. Not only, you know, with the men's basketball team, just, you know, here in general. I think we have that culture here that is really just special. You can't find it anywhere else.
While Charles plans on moving away from Chicago for grad school next year, he hopes to catch a few home games during breaks. And while it's impossible to say if his cheering led the men's basketball team to being undefeated at home in conference play this year, one thing is for certain: his presence in Gentile has always been a guaranteed 6th player. Matt Mason, Loyola News, Chicago.
And Charles will be traveling to St. Louis next week to watch Loyola play in Arch Madness. He said buying that ticket was the easiest $405 he's ever spent. It's that time of year again where Loyola students get a little break in the middle of the semester to relax. Loyola News Chicago reporter Michael Faso caught up with some students to see what their plans are and if they think Loyola's spring break is a little too soon.
With spring break just around the corner, I want to go around and ask fellow Ramblers what their plans are.
My plans for spring break are just to stick around Chicago and maybe go around to some museums a little bit.
So my plans for spring break, myself and 9 other friends are going to Florida. We got a house on Airbnb, so it should be a good time.
I also want to go around and ask people how they feel about spring break starting at the end of February and not actually in spring.
I feel like Loyola always kind of does this. It's always in a really awkward time. So it does suck, and it's going to be really cold. So not really a lot to do around here. It's just going to be watching Netflix, honestly, probably.
I don't know how to feel about that. It seems very early this year, and I kind of wonder why that is.
Well, it looks like a lot of Loyola students have a lot of fun plans. We hope everybody has a fun and safe spring break at the Water Tower campus. Michael Faso, Loyola News, Chicago.
Thanks, Michael. Personally, I'll be heading down to Nashville with some friends this week, and I'm really looking forward to it. But that's our news for today. We'll see you in 2 weeks after Loyola returns. Thanks for joining us tonight.